Welcome to another week, another show of Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Pleased to be joining you. Got another great show lined up for you this week. In a few moments, you'll see our good buddy John Steppe. Yeah, that John Steppe. He used to join us on the regular for the last 4 years as a Hawkeye beat reporter. Well, now he's back home in Wisconsin as a Wisconsin Badger beat reporter and writer. John, it is great to see you. Thanks for taking the time to do this. You left the Gazette to go back home to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, your hometown paper. You're a Milwaukee area guy. Marquette grad, I got to get that in there. But covering the Badgers, my friend, it is so good to see you, and thanks for doing this. How you doing?
I'm great. So great to see you. So happy to be doing this again. Always has been a pleasure to do this when I was in Iowa, and now a pleasure to come back and see a familiar face and talk to a familiar group of viewers about what should be a really good matchup this weekend.
Absolutely, and thank you for the kind words. And right back at you as you're recording this. We record this on Tuesday afternoon, October 7th. You're at the Wisconsin, one of the facilities where you were covering football, and now you're covering volleyball today. But John, I must mention what's going on with the quarterback situation for both teams. Of course, Iowa had their press availability today with players and Kirk Ferentz, and you're familiar with the schedule, very similar to what you're doing at Wisconsin now. But John, Kirk Ferentz had mentioned, yeah, it looks like Gronowski's going to be a go after his injury. But to have Hank Brown and Hecklinski in the background, they may get some time depending on who looks best, getting close to kickoff time. And he said he'll know for sure on Friday. John, you guys have had some issues at quarterback. So let's talk about that. You got a transfer in from Maryland last year in Billy Edwards, but he's not been healthy. You're coming off a tough loss with Michigan last week. Let's talk a little bit about where Wisconsin is going into this trophy game, John, first of all. Border battle, second of all. On FS1, 6 o'clock kick on night game in Madtown. Threw a lot at you. I'm going to get out of your way and let you spread it all out for us, please, my friend.
Yeah, quarterback has been a challenge from a health standpoint. It's certainly nothing new here in terms of these last two seasons. That's been a challenge that they've gone up against. So kind of to start with where things were in week one, they bring in Maryland transfer Billy Edwards. That was kind of their big transfer portal addition. He gets hurt with a knee sprain in week one against Miami of Ohio. He misses the Middle Tennessee game, misses the Alabama game. He comes back for the Maryland game, plays one drive before being pulled out, and did not play against Michigan. So their prize transfer portal addition at quarterback has been available for very little of the season. Another transfer portal quarterback from San Diego State, Danny O'Neill, was the guy that filled in for Billy Edwards initially, and he played that Middle Tennessee game, he played that Alabama game, then kind of surprised everybody going into that Michigan game, and Luke Fickell said that they're going with Hunter Simmons instead, a transfer from Southern Illinois, somebody who really hasn't played a lot of football at this level. He was in right at the end of the Maryland game, but really limited body of work, where I think there's a little bit of an unknown in terms of what everybody was going to see from that. But certainly, I would say some positives, some negatives from that Michigan game. Not necessarily, you're going down to somebody who was your third string quarterback in fall camp. So this offense has struggled in a lot of ways, and they're going to need more out of that position, whether that be Hunter Simmons, whether that be Billy Edwards, whether that be Danny O'Neill. And it's possible that you could see a combination where we have seen situations where Luke Fickell is not afraid to play multiple quarterbacks, even sometimes in the same drive. So that is one interesting aspect that you could see. That's one difference, I would say, from what you might be familiar with seeing at Iowa, is you could see a lot of different, you could see a couple different guys, whether that be in the Maryland game where they're switching between Billy Edwards and Danny O'Neill, or even, Danny O'Neill still got a couple snaps, didn't have any passing attempts, but had a couple snaps in that Michigan game. So even though Hunter Simmons has been the guy as long as Billy Edwards is out, is basically what Luke Fickell suggested, even though that has been the case, you could potentially be looking at a situation where you're not just seeing Simmons, you could potentially still see Danny O'Neill as well.
John, it's been intriguing to hear the Iowa players talk today, again at today's presser on Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday morning on October 7th, as we record this late afternoon on Tuesday, October 7th. Aaron Graves, star defensive lineman for the Hawkeyes, said, and you're familiar with Aaron, it's interesting to note that the Wisconsin Badgers, since spring practice, have been doing 42 push-ups after every practice to motivate themselves and remind themselves that Iowa won at Kinnick last year 42-10 and blew out Wisconsin. Maybe some bulletin board material back to the Hawkeyes when some of the Badger players were quoted as saying, man, who would have ever thought Iowa would score 42 points? And so let's talk about it a little bit. Besides the border rivalry, it being a trophy game and all that kind of good stuff, how is the defense? Now that we've talked offense with the Badgers, that defense has some motivation from last year. 42 points, a 42-10 loss. They have been mentioning it all offseason. That's why I bring it up to you today. So Aaron Graves kind of had that little wink and saying, yeah, we've got some extra motivation for those comments too now. So it's been interesting to see it go back and forth, John.
Yeah, and you look at it, there's a lot of reason for why they have that motivation in terms of giving up 42 points to Iowa, a rival that, they obviously aren't crazy about. That's a tough thing to take. And that's something that has stuck with them, obviously, throughout the spring. It's something that you heard about in the summer. And, just how uncompetitive that game was. And I think that was kind of one of the key things, or kind of one of maybe the impetus for them getting a lot more physical up front. And if you're looking for a positive from Wisconsin, obviously it's been a challenging season for them so far. 2-3, 3 consecutive losses. But if you're looking for positive, they are more physical up front. They are better in the rush defense at stopping the run. And that really, you look at just how much bigger they are on that defensive line, and with those edge rushers, that really is something that's going to be a really interesting matchup between that against Iowa's rushing attack. On the flip side, the secondary has had some issues. That's been an area that has not been perfect by any means. Malik Washington from Maryland had an exceptional performance against the Badgers, at Camp Randall. About a stone's throw from where I'm sitting right now in the field house. So, Malik Washington had an excellent game, true freshman quarterback there. So you have some issues that they need to work through. They've had some health issues. They've had some NCAA eligibility legal fight issues, with Nazir Forkerin being probably their best defensive back in fall camp and not being able to play while he continues to await word on the preliminary injunction that could determine whether he could play. So the secondary has had some issues, and that will be an interesting opportunity, whether that be Mark Gronowski, whether that be Hank Brown, whether that be Hecklinski, whoever that is at quarterback could potentially have some opportunities with this Wisconsin secondary based on what we've seen in recent weeks.
Yeah, John, you laid it out perfectly. The 3-2 Hawkeyes 1-1 in the Big Ten going into Madtown on Saturday, 6 p.m. kick on FS1 from Camp Randall Stadium. Of course, the Badgers are 0-2 in the Big Ten and 2-3, as you mentioned, overall. So it'll be a fun one. So, John, let's take a pause here. When we come back, John was kind enough to agree to join us for 2 segments, as he usually did back when he was a Gazette reporter in Cedar Rapids covering the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now he's back home in Madison, but Milwaukee area kid, grew up, and John went to Marquette University and now covering the Badgers for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. John, I can't wait to talk to you next segment, because we're going to talk a little coaching, some history, current coaches, all that kind of stuff. You have a unique perspective, having covered the Hawkeyes for the last 4 years with the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Now you're back home in Wisconsin covering the Badgers. So I want to talk to you a little bit about coaching. So I look forward to catching up with you in this next segment. And thanks for agreeing to do both segments. You ready to go?
I am.
Can't wait. Folks, there he is, John Steppe. John, of course, covers the Badgers. I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. We'll be back with more in just a few moments.
Hawkeye is brought to you by BettorEdge, your ultimate social betting marketplace. With no VIG, you're bound to win more on every bet on BettorEdge. Founded by Hawkeye alum James Siles and proud Iowan Greg Kieski, BettorEdge delivers an unmatched betting experience. Plus, what's not to love when they're committed to supporting charities and children's hospitals near you? Join the action now. Sign up at bettoredge.com/Hawkeye and get $10 to start winning more today. BettorEdge, where your social betting means your bets go further and you win more.
Welcome back. back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Pleased to have this guy joining us. John Steppe, you knew him back in the day, the last 4 years, covering the Hawkeyes for the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Now he's back home in Madtown, back in Wisconsin, but in Madison, covering the Badgers for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. John, it's great to see you again, and thanks for agreeing to do both segments. Let's talk some coaching. You and I talked off the air. Let's bring it on the air. So viewers, let me relieve you in the fact John said he's behaving himself now that he's back home. So not that he wasn't in Cedar Rapids, but in Iowa City, but we think he's doing okay. We'll take him at his word. So, John, let's talk a little bit about coaching. You know, it's interesting. You and I were talking off air. Let's bring it on the air. In your time covering the Hawkeyes, you heard a lot of, hey, they got to get rid of Brian Ferentz. They got to get rid of Coach Ferentz, Kirk Ferentz. Now he's got the record. He's the all-time wins leader in Big Ten history with 207 currently, as we record this on Tuesday afternoon, late afternoon on October 7th. But there's some coaching turmoil or conversations going on around Wisconsin, you know, and everybody, I always say to people when they do the call-in show, I host with Doug Wagner and former Hawkeye wide receiving great Marvin McNutt. After every Hawkeye win or loss, John, it doesn't seem to matter. Hawkeye fans are like, when are they getting rid of Kirk Ferentz? And my question is always, who are you going to replace him with? You're experiencing this in Wisconsin. You know, Luke Fickell was the flavor of the month for a couple of years ago, coming out of Ohio State, then Cincinnati. Wisconsin goes out and gets him. I referenced was Nebraska with some of the coaching issues they've had, seem to be settling things a little bit now with Matt Rule. Talk to me a little bit about the subtleties and changes you see from covering Kirk Ferentz and the Hawkeyes to now covering Luke Fickell and the Wisconsin Badgers. Please, John.
Yeah, it's been interesting. You know, Luke Fickell comes here, and I think pretty much every national outlet that, you know, does the grades of different coaches, you know, every coaching carousel, you consistently saw A's, A pluses, you know, really high grades nationally. There weren't a ton of people, you know, there are some people that are hoping for Jim Leonhard in terms of being a Wisconsin guy, but nationally, you didn't hear a ton of criticism of Luke Fickell when he got here. He implements the air raid that obviously didn't go so well. They parted ways with that offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, and then they bring in Jeff Grimes. But the issue there is offensively, you're a couple of years behind where you would be if you would have immediately went with Grimes or somebody with that type of scheme, where now they want to be that team that can run the ball, you know, and do those things that traditionally you expect from Wisconsin football. But they're working with a very young offensive line. Against Maryland, they were starting 3 redshirt freshmen. So, you know, you see maybe a few parallels between this 2025 offensive line here and maybe what Iowa had back in 2022, where you had a lot of guys who were in there maybe before you would ideally like to have them in. So they've been going through some challenges at this point in the Luke Fickell era. There's a lot of fan frustration that was evident, especially in that Maryland loss, and not a game that you're expecting. You know, Maryland has been putting together obviously very respectable season, but this is not necessarily what you would expect from a Wisconsin-Maryland game in terms of Wisconsin just not being competitive on their home field. So that's been a challenging part of this era right now for Wisconsin football. You know, there are a lot of boos, there are fire Fickell chants in that Maryland game. So patience is perhaps wearing more than a little thin here. And I think it's maybe a reminder, you know, especially when you're contrasting that to what you're seeing in Iowa in terms of there is a value in continuity. There's a value in terms of a consistency. Maybe you're not getting that very top of the top results, but you know, if you're winning 9 games on a regular basis, there's a value in that. And I think right now, when you look at Wisconsin, now they have a brutal schedule, and that kind of everything with this season kind of comes with that context that 6 ranked teams, the most on this schedule, the most out of any team in the Big Ten. But I think right now, most people here, if there was a path to 7, 8, 9 wins, they'd be thrilled. So it's been interesting in terms of seeing that perspective, having covered Iowa in some real high moments in terms of 2 division titles and some frustration and understandable frustration too with this offense. You know, pre-Tim Lester, it's been interesting to see in terms of, you know, obviously you need to adapt with the times. You know, Iowa did that with hiring Tim Lester, but you also can see sometimes the challenges of if you don't do that change in a way that stays true to who you are, and kind of what you saw with the air raid. Um, there are a lot of challenges that come with that, and that's currently what Wisconsin's going through.
I've made a habit, John, the last couple of weeks for sure, to keep mentioning what you just said in reference to Kirk Ferentz. And you know this. It predates you a bit. If the Hawkeyes get to the 8-win mark, and as I mentioned, they're 3-2 right now. If they get to the 8-win mark this year again, that will be 10 years in a row that the Hawkeyes under Kirk Ferentz will have won at least 8 games or more in the last 10 seasons. There are only 5 other schools, so 6 in all of NCAA Division I football, with the likes of Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, and Iowa in there. So I always say to folks, the grass always seems greener on the other side. And thank you for taking us through some of that, because, again, your perspective is so unique because you've been on both sides of the fence with Iowa and now with Wisconsin. John, my friend, it is so great to see you. I know you've got things pressing around you there, and thanks for joining us from the facilities there at Wisconsin. If things play out in the schedule, I'd love to have you back during basketball. I promised you and congratulated you when you got the gig to go back home to Wisconsin from Iowa. I'd have you on whenever there's Wisconsin week, and here we are, my friend. Hawks coming off the bye, going into Badger week. So if that works for you, I'd love to talk to you again during basketball season.
Yeah, absolutely. Always great to be back in the Iowa airwaves, and a lot of great memories from my time there that I bring with me here now that I'm back in my home state. But certainly a special place in my heart, and happy to be back on here.
John, truly my pleasure, and thank you again. It's always great to see you. For John Steppe, I'm Dave O'Hara. John now covering the Badgers for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, formerly covering the Hawkeyes for the Cedar Rapids Gazette. So thanks to John, and we'll be back to close out the show with Doug Wagner, the voice of Iowa, WMT Radio, and Hawkeye pregame and postgame shows. I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. We'll be back with more in just a few moments.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman from Merschman Seeds. Substitutions cost you money. Why take their seconds when you can have our first choice? Here's Ben Pieper to tell you more about Merschman Power Core Enlist corn.
We are way ahead of Big Seed on this one. This corn has 4 different post-herbicide tolerances, multiple modes of action for above-ground pests, and it is some of the highest-yielding corn genetics that are out on the market today.
If you're one of the many that got substituted on your corn hybrid last spring, contact your local Merschman Seeds dealer today and ask them about Power Core Enlist corn. From Merschman Seeds, your friend in the field.
Welcome back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Momentarily, you'll see our good buddy Doug Wagner will be joining us. Doug, the voice of Iowa Morning Show on WMT Radio and other affiliated stations throughout Iowa. Doug, my friend, we do the post-game radio show together. You're kind enough to play my Hawkeye historical highlights during your morning show, and then, of course, in the afternoon show around 8:40 a.m. and 5:40 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I got to tell you, Doug, a couple of things. I'm loving doing the post-game show with you and former Hawkeye great wide receiver Marvin McNutt. We've been doing this a couple of years, and then you and I and James Moses do the basketball post-game shows. But this Hawkeye historical highlights, Doug, it has taken me, to quote the old Steely Dan song, I'm reeling in the years. I am loving it and getting great feedback from the listeners. But it just ties into everything we talk about here on this Hawkeye show, but you and I and Marvin talk about in the post-game shows. Hawkeye history is fantastic, Doug.
Yeah, it is, and I'm glad you're doing that. Good to see you, Dave, and because I usually don't get to see you. It's like once this year because we do this remotely. But I think for me, the big thing is that you've got so much to work from, and I'm glad that you're able to work with the Iowa SID and Matt Weitzel's office in order to pull together some of the information, because it's sort of a one place repository on Tuesdays and Thursdays where people can get their Hawkeye fix in the morning and in the afternoon.
Well, thank you again for that, and thanks for joining us and taking the time, because I know you're crazy busy. It's like herding cats.
This is AI, Doug. This real Doug's asleep because of all the night games.
So when everybody wants to talk about bringing in these new young coaches, and we're still stuck, quoting some of our listeners, we're still stuck with Kirk Ferentz. I'll take that 8-4 team, 9-3 team, Doug, and go into a New Year's Day Bowl every year. So when I said that to John, I said the grass isn't always greener when you look at these young coaches coming in, Doug.
No, you're right about that. And I think it's interesting. I've got family roots that go back to the state of Wisconsin. My dad was born just outside of Prairie Rouge, Duchesne. We had a farm out there. My sister still lives in northeastern Wisconsin. So she's Badger some, but she's mostly Marquette. But I guess the idea is that they're really having a hard time right now because they look back to the Ron Dane days. They look back to the White days, James White days, where, they were pounding out, 7 to 10 yards a carry, and they passed just for frivolity. And now, they've really got to work to try to get even to a W or a respectable loss. Iowa's won 4 of the last 5. I won't belabor this point. Iowa's won 4 of the last 5. I think that you've got Gronowski on the road coming back off the injury. I think that he's going to be able to step up at Camp Randall. It's a night game. There's a lot of energy, but I'm hoping that they have nets around the outside of the stadium at Camp Randall. So when they jump, they don't jump out of the stadium because I was going to take it to them. I honestly believe I was going to take it to them.
I do too, Doug. And no, I'm glad you went there. And I'll say this to you. Yeah, we have the Hawkeye wave and they have jump, which is their own great tradition and good for them. And I've been at Camp Randall. Have you been there when they do jump and play that song?
It's the most rickety place in the world.
Oh, my goodness. I thought that place was coming down like kindling with Doug. I was looking around like, oh my gosh, here we go. But, the only thing I'll say to you when you mentioned about all the history and that, and, I'm from Northeast Iowa, right across the bridge from Prairie on the Iowa side, about 25 miles away in Postville, Castelia area. But so I have a lot of friends and other extended family who are in Wisconsin, and some Badger into Gopher land. And I barely talk to those people as well. Kidding, not really. But, the intriguing thing, Doug, is I always used to joke with them and say, we're done supplying you with coaches. No more Barry Alvarez, former Hawkeye assistant. No more Brett Bielema, former Hawkeye player, even though he was on the Illinois side of the Quad Cities and now he's at Illinois. But so I said that. I said, the downfall at Wisconsin has been once the state of Iowa quit supplying them with coaches and the University of Iowa Hawkeyes, they've kind of hit a downskid, Doug. Say, I know you're ecstatic being a morning guy. We're doing all these late. We have finished the postgame show, Doug, at 3 a.m. This week will probably be 2 a.m. with a kick. I can adjust my schedule a little bit because I do, the TV shows I can record at various times. My other radio commitments I can do at various times.
Right.
But you are locked in. You're in studio hitting the airwaves at 4:59 every Monday through Friday, and you got to get in there early to do a little prep. But the one thing I wanted to close out with what you brought up right there, it used to be some cachet playing that night game. Hey, you're in prime time, and now it seems like the window is you got to have that 2:30 game, and that's about for the foreseeable future. There are still 3 unscheduled times left yet for the Hawkeyes, but they do play against Penn State. That's going to be a 6:30 kick upcoming. So, Doug, it used to be that night game, the primetime game, was it. Now, the last handful of years, it seems like they're kind of shuttling also, teams that used to be, but now aren't number one. Now they're getting that night game. And I hope I'm wrong on that, but I'm getting that vibe, Doug.
You know what, and I understand why you say that. I think it depends on what the game is, because again, this is an Iowa-Wisconsin game. This is obviously something they're going for a regional effect in this, because this is it's a trophy game. It's a big push between these two. It's border state rivalry. You've got national reach for both teams. And then you go to the Penn State game. I mean, Penn State's going to have to pick some chops up on that one in order to get back to where they need to be after losing to Iowa. Has the opportunity to play David against Goliath at that point again, too. I think it's a good opportunity because they like the optics of the jump and they think that's going to bring in the fans. I think it's going to bring in the fans, too. We'll see with the viewership. I think that Penn State game is going to be a really interesting one to be a part of and watch that as it plays out after the Wisconsin game, because then that's the straight next one we go to. So I'm not as down on the night games, because I think it brings a completely different vibe to Big Ten football and especially Iowa football at home, especially when you're playing. But the Wisconsin game, sure, over there, when you get jumping about 10:30 at night, all the frat houses behind there, because most people don't know Camp Randall's tucked up inside an area that's just houses and frat houses and apartment buildings and stuff like that for the students. So it's not like in the middle of this big megalopolis or out somewhere in the side. It's in the middle, right there in the middle of campus.
Well, the other thing is Madtown is crazy enough during an 11 o'clock kick or a 2:30 kick. Like you said, you turn the lights off. It's starting to get dark now around 6:30. Kickoff 6 o'clock on FS1, Camp Randall Stadium, Madtown, as you mentioned, Madison, Wisconsin. The 3-2 Hawkeyes 1-1 in the Big Ten. The 2-3 Wisconsin Badgers 0-2 in the Big Ten. You mentioned a trophy game, a border battle. Should be a fun one. And I agree with you. I think the Hawkeyes are going to roll this game. I always do, but I definitely see this time. And Doug, one last thing to your point. I'm going to push away my feelings of feeling like these night games are becoming secondary. So thank you for that. I needed that little shot in the arm. Yeah, always great telling stories, exchanging stories, laughing back and forth. And hopefully we'll be laughing over a Hawkeye victory. You and I and former Hawkeye wide receiving great Marvin McNutt in our postgame show this Saturday. Again, Doug Wagner all over WMT, specifically the mornings. Monday through Friday during the week, but weekend show is Car Geek Hour with Jay Castle and all the other shows he does. Check out Doug's information at the bottom of the screen. Go to those links for all his shows. If I mentioned the stations and the shows besides WMT, we'd be here to infinity and beyond. So just, he's everywhere, anywhere you got a radio on WMT and affiliated stations, check him out. Doug Wagner, our friend. My friend, it's always great to see you. And thank you so much. Always great chatting with you.
Thanks, bud. Take care. Good to see you
You
again,
too.
Dave.
Yeah, you as well, Doug. Thank you. For Doug Wagner and John Steppe and my production partners at BettorEdge and BettorEdge.com, Greg Kieski and James Stiles, I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. That's all from us. Thanks to all of you.